these nighttime jaunts. She set about running up a batch of fairy cakes, with nothing but a wooden spoon and a ceramic bowl, just as she had been taught. Pru fastened the apron around her waist, then laid out her ingredients and tools in a row on the countertop. She got the familiar jolt of happiness, knowing she had everything she needed to execute her plan. It felt exactly the same now as it had all those years ago. She cast her eye over the white flour, the bowl of sugar, and the greasy lump of margarine splayed on the saucer next to the shiny, clean bowl, awaiting her attention. She hummed to herself as she tipped the margarine and sugar together and began creaming them into a thick paste. She savoured the gritty crunch on the back of the spoon as it smashed the crystals against the crackle-glazed side of the china bowl, pushing and churning until the mixture billowed with tiny bubbles of air, and her fingers ached. Next came the spoonfuls of plain flour, a drop of essence, baking powder, the egg, and gradually more flour. Pru couldn't fully describe the lift to her spirits or the bounce to her step as she watched the dry ingredients transform themselves into a pale golden batter. There was no great science to knowing when the mixture was ready. Instead, she used the tried-and-tested dropping method, lifting the spoon and watching to see how the cake mix fell. Too quickly meant it was too thin, calling for more flour and more mixing, whereas a blob that refused to shift from the back of the spoon required more liquid and a light mix. When the batter acquired the perfect consistency, it dropped into the bowl with jaw-clenching slowness. As the fairy cakes baked, the anticipation filled her stomach with butterflies. While they cooled, she made a strong cup of coffee to go with them. Then she decorated them, exactly as her Nan had instructed, sparsely sprinkling hundreds and thousands onto a tiny misshapen pond of white icing, most of which had been a luxury in her Nan's house. Finally, she popped the soft, vanilla-scented sponges into her mouth, allowing the sugar to spread its warm, satisfying sweetness across her tongue, and the icing to stick to the roof of her mouth. She gobbled them greedily and quickly, all of them. "I know you're shaking your head and tutting at me, but don't judge me, Alfie. I could have far worse habits." This she uttered into the ether, with her eyes raised skywards and a smile about her mouth, as she licked a stray blob of icing and a couple of sprinkles from her lip. As proprietor of the world-renowned Plum Patisserie, Pru had access to any number of delicate iced fancies and exquisite sugar-dusted morsels each and every day. Yet none of them gave her anything like the pleasure she got from eating a warm fairy cake made to her Nan's exacting recipe and wolfed down illicitly in the wee small hours. The parcels of moist cake not only made her mouth water, but if she closed her eyes she was back in their grotty kitchen in Bow, a little girl again, working diligently at their wobbly, enamel-topped table. Back to a time before she knew anything of the world beyond their front door, before drive and aspiration had yoked her to a winding uphill path. Her Nan, standing at the shallow china sink, dressed in a pink wraparound overall that had worn thin at the seams, and her three brothers, with pinched cheeks and rings of grime against the backs of their necks, hovering around the large china mixing bowl, their dirty fingers scooping at the fine lines of cake mixture residue, which they deposited into their eager mouths. The smell of the fluffy little ingots baking would almost drive them to tears. Clustering around the stove, unusually silent, they waited. Her Nan would then turn the cakes out of the bun tin onto a wire rack on the sideboard. The scented steam that they gave off hypnotized them, and it would feel like an eternity before she would allow them to take one each. When they finally got one of those little cakes in their mitts, round-eyed and with a mouthful of sweet crumbs, it was a moment of bliss in an otherwise bliss-free life, and it was wonderful. For Pru, nothing symbolized her success as much as her ability to eat a whole batch made in the kitchen of Plum Patisserie. She never told anyone about her trips down to the big kitchen. It was another little secret for her to keep. Pru laughed to herself as she perched on the edge of her bed a couple of hours later and applied the creme de la mer moisturizer to her face and throat.